Welcome to Ask the Meshperts, a short series of Q&A sessions that we're doing weekly to talk to all things Kubernetes, microservices, and service mesh. Today, we're going to be focusing on what's ahead at next week's KubeCon conference, and this will be our last one of the year. If you have any Ask the Meshperts topics you'd like covered or you'd like to join us for one in 2019, feel free to reach out at hello@askthemesh.io. Today we have a special guest with us, so can I ask everybody to introduce themselves?
Okay, so I am James Governor. I'm one of the founders of an industry analyst company called Redmonk. We focus on developer-led and practitioner-led adoption of technology. So there's other people trying to understand the world through the lens of the buyer. We're really about engineers, why they make the decisions they do, which obviously kind of goes with the secular shift we're seeing in the industry where, hopefully IT choices are not made by legal and procurement.
Yeah. Guys, you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Hey, I'm Randy. I lead market development over here at Aspen Mesh, and so that means I spend a lot of time talking to customers and trying to figure out how to translate their needs into a product roadmap that we can deliver on.
And I'm Sean Wormke. I'm the incubation lead here at Aspen Mesh, and I'm responsible for the business and the rest of the things that we do here.
Yep, very cool. So let's dive right in. I think that we'll spend a bit of time on service mesh stuff at KubeCon, but also focus a little bit more broadly on what we're excited to see in general. So talking service mesh at KubeCon, I'd say since Austin last year, and Copenhagen and now Seattle, there have been a lot of service mesh sessions at all of the KubeCon events for the past year or so now. It seems like there's a trend away from service mesh as a technology pattern, and at least it seems CNCF is trying to attempt to talk about more use cases and end users around service mesh. But definitely there's still a lot of hype around it. So I'm curious, what do you guys think? What's hype and what's ripe in the service mesh space right now?
Well, it's a hot button for me because it's actually irritated me. The lack of solid use cases in trying to get people to understand the value of a new technology has been pretty disappointing. From my perspective, I think service mesh should really be playing into a couple of areas where there are clear opportunities and benefits. So one of those, sorry, I'm just coughing there. That's not very helpful. So one of those is like breaking down monoliths. So taking a small amount of traffic and routing it somewhere else. So breaking down, every enterprise organization out there has these monolithic apps. They're trying to move forward. They're trying to refactor that. So having a sophisticated, service discovery, routing, all of the goodness on top of the sidecars is definitely, I think, an opportunity. And then for me, more specifically, there's what I've been calling progressive delivery, which if we think about that basket of things that cloud companies do, A/B testing, blue-green deployments, canarying, where you're taking some small amount of traffic, rather than cutting over the entire customer base to a new service or feature. You're kind of decoupling the deploy from the release. And in that world of feature flags and so on, it's like, what does that look like? And it turns out that service mesh is actually quite a good quite a good fit for thinking about how we can have more sophisticated application delivery with things like, as I say, for me, progressive deployment or progressive delivery is really about putting the user back in charge. If you've got your Comcast and you've got 30,000 customer service agents, the last thing you want to do is break the application environment for all of them, either just from a user experience or indeed a breaking change, because if you ruin things for 30,000 people, that's going to reflect to the kind of 100 million plus customers you have. That would not be good. So thinking about, could we, first check out getting our, in fact, I talked to Cloudflare about this just the other day. They pick a city at any given time that becomes their sort of canary city. So they will route traffic from that city to a change before they do that to anyone else. So Microsoft calls it progressive experimentation. What's the blast radius before I roll this out to everyone? And for me, the real key about progressive delivery and the opportunity of service mesh there is being able to say to the business, you're in charge of when you adopt the new features and functions that IT is delivering. So we've just had this long period of outsourcing and all the horrificness where basically kind of IT was considered the boat anchor on the business. Well, we're now at a point where actually in at least in pockets, IT is moving faster than the business can. And I think thinking about service mesh to enable that and put the business in charge when IT could just get on with their job, I think that's a real opportunity.
Yeah, and I think building on the business opportunity, I think there have been some challenges, if I think about the last 12 months, in terms of at least what we're seeing on the Istio side of service mesh, that a lot of those capabilities, a lot of the simplicity, the packaging of all the benefits you mentioned, James, that's part of the promise of service mesh. But some of the challenges, I think, have been the lack of enterprise features. Big one that we see as you look at RBAC, and specifically RBAC around policy, the lack of nuance around that. That hinders the realization of the business benefits, because no real organization is going to roll out a technology that either says, you can change all the policy or you can change none of the policy. Mm-hmm. Never the twain shall meet. So I think it's a matter of the evolution of the technology to get to.
But it's kind of funny because you think the community would have realized that, because the same thing happened with Kubernetes, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was like, can we have role-based access? So yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly, provisioning of the features that enterprises expect.
Yeah.
Is that that's gonna be one of the things that makes it relevant.
Exactly. Yeah, you need the tools so the development teams can use this in the real world, not in just some abstracted perfect world that only exists academically.
Yeah, and I think too, I think it's interesting, James, that you brought up the point about IT being able to move much faster than they were before. And I think now more than ever, there's such a push to get applications into production as quickly as possible, because that's where the real business value lies. And I think something that is often overlooked from a service mesh point of view is it does allow developers to operate kind of in their own space and at their own pace, while still letting the platform owners and the IT teams make sure that the business is functioning along all of the kind of rules and compliance things that they need to meet. And I think that's really important, like Randy says, as you start to look at how enterprises use these technologies. You still have a business to run. You still have to protect yourself from risk. And a technology like service mesh allows you to maintain that sanity within your network and within your cluster, while still letting your application developers move quickly and bring their code to market as quick as possible.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
So I'm curious what gets the users over the hump. I think it's clear that the industry trend is going this way. You see all the major vendors, Google and IBM, are backing Istio. Azure has been doing Service Fabric Mesh. AWS announced App Mesh last week, right? Like, it's clearly the market has said, yes, Service Mesh is the technology pattern you're going to use to manage these containerized applications at runtime. Mm-hmm. How do the actual users catch up and say, yeah, this is what we're going to use to manage these applications? What's the big hurdle there, do you think?
Well, look, so from a vendor perspective, the good news is, AWS has said this market is real. Yep. The bad news is AWS has said this market is real.
Yeah.
So, I think as much as anything else, it's still early days. And most importantly for me is that, what is the technology actually for? And so the more people out there that are doing a thoroughgoing job of explaining what are the advantages, like, we've obviously, we're still really in this hype cycle. We're breaking down applications into microservices. We're developing new microservices. And I think pretty clearly Service Mesh begins to, tie into that world, but we just need to explain it a little better. The fact that services are likely to be deprecated much more quickly. Not only that, but the whole kind of movement towards failure as an expectation. Resilience engineering, that's where we are now with our microservices.
Yeah.
And it's somewhat fragile. When we're trying to be, we're doing this stuff to be more resilient, but we're actually creating, areas where we need to be so much better at debugging. Do we actually know where the service is running? All of this stuff. So I think that's the key to it. We need to move from that to having this this control plane that enables us to be more effective using microservices. And I think that's I think one of the key sort of challenges, strokes, opportunities. Just telling the story. I mean, Istio, I think in particular, they need to take a step back and think about the use cases, because I've heard a lot of sort of cheerleading. Oh, what do we need Istio for? Oh, well, because it runs on Kubernetes. It's like, what? Well, yeah, because you need to take advantage of Kubernetes. It's like, well, okay, to do what? Well, and then you sort of ask, then it becomes circular. It's like, well, Kubernetes has some issues, so we'll solve those with Istio Mesh. And it just, I have not felt that community has done a great job of communicating with the wider market. But as I say, things like canarying, blue-green deployments, there's some interesting work that I'm seeing, and I think that's one of the real opportunities, because at the end of the day, look, enterprises want to they want to be doing more deployments safely, and they want to be learning from and replicating some of the methods and approaches that we see from the vendors you mentioned. How does Amazon work? How does Google work? How does Netflix work? All of that's Spotify. What is their working methods? We're not going to be exactly like them, but we do want to be a bit like them. And again, I think it's just important that we help people to understand where this fits in. And so far, it feels to me like the market's not being that well made. I think that at Mesh, I think that Amazon, the thing about them is how many customers do they bring to bear on a new on a new market when they introduce a service? Now, that's the really amazing thing. They announce something, and there are 500 people using it the next day. I mean, as we know, it's not super easy getting 500 organizations to use your software. So that sort of scale that they have means that they can definitely be market makers. And I'd see the entrance of AWS as good. And maybe not for Istio. I think what's really interesting to me is it's a very, very strong kingmaker move for Envoy. So Envoy, undoubtedly, I mean, the AWS news is great for Envoy. I think that now we know that is an industry standard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in terms of getting folks over the hump, I mean, you mentioned it's driving towards business use cases and not just a bullet point list of cool features.
Very much.
I think the other piece is then also telling a story about, well, how do I integrate this seamlessly into my existing infrastructure? I'm not going to build everything greenfield. I'm not going to rip everything down that I have already. I've got stuff that I need to use. Tell me how this transition works so that I don't have to use Istio in all the places where it works with all the things that I have now. I don't have to build everything new on top of totally new infrastructure. So I think those are the two stories that I think in terms of talking to folks we've been chatting with. Those are the concerns, and I think those are the obstacles that we still have to figure out.
And I think really at a higher level, to me, what it's going to take to get this technology over the hump is really disruption and transformation within larger companies. So as smaller companies come around and challenge some of these more traditional players, they have to transform the way that they do business. Through that business transformation, they look at new technologies, and that's where these use cases are really going to come from. That's where it's going to go from sort of the sandbox and the early adopters into a wider deployment of these things, and then tools and services and things can start to be built on top. And so, a lot of that is just coming from, the more larger companies have to transform their businesses to compete with upstarts and people nipping at their heels, the more real use cases that are going to come out of it. I think we're just starting to see, the beginnings of that. And Istio might be a solution who's looking for a problem in some sense, but I think it does solve, some real problems early on. It came out of, a concept of running these things at scale. And I think that the more, large companies that start to use these technologies, the more real use cases that we'll have.
I think that's right. I mean, there's like a threat posture and an opportunity posture. And, it's like, you're walking down, like sort of a dead end. and you look around, it's got walls all around, and then you see that there's this like apple orchard on the other side, and you're like, I would kind of like to get those apples. I wonder if I can get over this wall so I can get into that garden and get those apples. And you're struggling to do that, and then then an angry animal starts running down the red dead end towards you. That's the threat. That's the new market entrance. And let me tell you, the combination of the apples and the animal, that's going to get you over that wall and into the garden right there, into the orchard.
Yeah.
That is quite the metaphor. I like it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that's great. We were supposed to talk about KubeCon, so a little bit there. Lots of service mesh stuff coming up at KubeCon. It'll be interesting to see it, but more generally, I'm curious what you're looking forward to seeing session-wise or keynote-wise the most at KubeCon. I think one of the things they're trying to do is put more of a focus on the end user, and I'm particularly curious about going to some of the end user sessions or what.
Yeah, for sure.
Or two, and I wonder if there's any a session or two or three in particular that you are interested in and might recommend.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's exactly what you said. I mean, in terms of the specifics, it's just the situation has changed. So 2017, it felt like, we were still nerds talking about nerd stuff. What I've seen is just like this year has been incredible for Kubernetes. So, just the momentum of vendor announcements, but then I shot a video last week and, it's like, let's go around London and see, all of the people that are now running Kubernetes. And I walk around the corner, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about them. Monzo, it's a challenger bank. They just raised $20 million in 20 million pounds, I think, in 3 hours in a crowdfunder to their own customers. They run on Kubernetes. But I was walking from there to HSBC. Huge Kubernetes project. They're going to be like Google's, real preview customer for GKE on-prem. Then I walked down to BlackRock. They did a Kubernetes project, 100 days. That went well. They're going to do more with that. Then I went from there, and I mentioned my friend Kirk Wiley at State Street. Basically they're completely rebuilding their transaction platform. Again, that's going to be Kubernetes. Then I kept going, and it's like I wanted to stop at a store, and it's like, oh, M&S, this retailer. And I just Googled it, and it turns out their new mobile payment application is running on Kubernetes. Then I went into the paper store, and I picked up the Financial Times. The best speaker at KubeCon in London was Sarah Jane Wells from the FT. She was, did I say in London? Sorry, in Copenhagen. Slight difference there. I was on my London roll. Sarah Jane Wells at the FT, fantastic job about making Kubernetes and microservices not seem terrifying, but a bit like having a cup of tea, just something that normal people do. Then I picked up a Times, News Corp, Kubernetes. If you've recently got a new passport in the UK, the Home Office is running Kubernetes. We know in the States, Target, they're doing amazing things with Kubernetes. They're running it in their stores. You've got Chick-fil-A. They're gonna have Kubernetes in every outlet. So for me, I just agree with you. Go and see the user stories, the end user stories. I think that's super interesting to me. The degree to which something that looked like it might be a science experiment is now something that it's rolling out into production. I see this across the board. And yeah, I mean, it's always the customer stuff. So I don't know if there's like a specific session, but I would say, and in fact, I don't know if Sarah Jane Wells is speaking there. So let me.
I think she is. I think I saw her on the agenda again for one of the.
Sarah.
It may have been China she was at, but.
Let me just check that again.
Yeah.
I think, Zach, I was looking through setting my schedule for this just this morning, and I noticed there's one from a company called Fairfax Media talking about their sort of digital transformation and their strategy from a 180-year-old kind of media company. And company,
Yeah.
into this modern world. And I think, just for me, listening to those stories, how these businesses are transforming, why their successes, but most importantly, sort of their failures and what didn't go well, is also, I think, something to take away from these, especially as other users are starting to go down these paths. Listening to what people have done, what went well, what didn't go so well, can really help as you work through that journey on your own.
Yeah, and I think it's been really interesting to kind of feel the conversation change. We've been sponsors at the last 3 KubeCons, and we'll be at this one. And definitely, just in the booth or wandering around talking to people, the conversation has kind of shifted from a year and a half ago, where it was this neat technology, and what Google was doing was pretty cool, to, I feel like more recently it's, oh, how can I use this in my organization? And that's like a very new thing in the last 6 months, I'd say.
So, and actually, I'll just take the glasses off again for continuity reasons. I mean, I remembered like one speaker who, I just think he's great. This guy called Brian Borum, works for the company called Weaveworks. So they're kind of doing what they call GitOps tool chains. So basically leading with Git, developers, definitely that's kind of one of the places they live. Automating from that, using Git as a, basically kind of your desired state, and then letting all the automation behind that do your actual state, tying that together with an observability loop. Brian's great. He is, he's a good storyteller, super smart guy, and I would say, that's definitely a talk that I'm likely to go and try and see.
Good to know. Cool. So KubeCon's coming up in, 5 days now. Really exciting. I know for a lot of us, especially you, James, it's kind of the end to a very long fall conference season.
Yep.
So, after KubeCon, a lot of us go into the holidays and kind of check out till 2019. I'm curious, next year, any big new trends or things of note you think are going to happen in 2019?
I'll sell my own idea again. I do think, I don't know what it's going to be called, but definitely this world of progressive delivery. How do we take advantage of some of these new technologies to kind of start being a little bit more sophisticated about how we roll out services to our end users? I think that's important. We've been only talking about becoming faster. More velocity. And there is this kind of, as Nicole Forsgren has shown with the Dora research, elite performers are moving faster, and having fewer outages and so on. But I think really getting to grips with that conversation between the business and development, software developers are definitely the new kingmakers, but the business wants to be in charge of when stuff is deployed. So I think that's a big transformation. And then also really kind of watching this where does function as a service and serverless meet Kubernetes from a technical perspective. I think that's one of the areas I'm expecting to be doing a fair amount of work next year. How's Knative going to play out? Functions as a service. That's I think a way that people want to develop. I think that we need more opinionated frameworks for Kubernetes to be more productive, and I think those are going to begin to emerge over the next 12 months or so.
Yep.
Yeah, I think for me, I see continued adoption, but along with that, some consolidation in the players. There's lots going on out there. So I think we'll see some consolidation. I think we'll see an increase in more fuller stack offerings, being able to layer some of these technologies on top, whether that's functions as a service or whether that's observability platforms and things like that to help people run their businesses more effectively. Obviously, as adoption increases, people are less and less likely to buy 20 different solutions from 20 different vendors. They want things coming from a single source so they can deal with support and all the things that they need to ensure they have business continuity moving forward. So I really think, consolidation and more fuller stack offerings is something I expect to happen over the next year for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think to add to that, I think one of the trends I've seen so far as we've moved from kind of early 2018 to now, and I expect this to continue in 2019, is the microservices transitions for large enterprises, I think, start to become more real. If I think about the conversations we had, say, in the spring, it was a lot of, architect type conversations, sort of sketching out plans. Hey, this is our, 18 to 36 month plan. I think as we've looked to this fall, some of those conversations have been more around folks deeper in the organization around a specific project with a specific delivery date. And so in that sense, I think that's how these things become real. You start with that initial POC. If it's successful, then you start to see broad enterprise-wide adoption. I expect that to continue into 2019 and get a lot more real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spread out of the pockets kind of to enterprise-wide initiatives.
Yeah,
I think that's right. Cool. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. If you're watching, thanks for checking out the last Ask the Meshperts of 2018, and we hope to see you back here next year.
Enjoy your holidays, everyone.